Morning, everybody. We're here to talk about something very, very interesting. You hear about it in the headlines all the time. You read a lot about it, which is, put simply, the rise of populism, a new kind of politics that it is argued we are now seeing as almost a global trend. But are we really? And to talk about that, we have a very eminent panel today. Ashutosh, Varshney, well-known political scientist and writer. Kamal, Nath, senior leader of the Congress Party. Yogendra, Yadav, we knew him as a psephologist. He's now a psephologist turned politician. Swapan, Dasgupta, senior journalist, member of parliament. Now, let me start by asking first the very, very basic question, and let me frame it. Swapan, I'll start with you. We'll just start left to right. There seems to be some sort of broad trend if you look at politics across the world. And to me, there's one thing that seems to connect all these disparate countries, which is that there is a pushback against politics as usual. There's a pushback against what could be called the old elites. That's one dimension of what we seem to see. The other dimension seems to be a deep sort of personalization of power. And the third seems to be messaging, where messaging has become all critical to the extent that narrative will trump nuance every time. There's almost no space to make a complex argument in politics anymore. When you look at the sort of Trumpification of politics, how do you think populism applies to Indian politics as we understand it today?
Well, firstly, Barkha, I think there are, out of the three features you mentioned about populism, there are two which have been there even before this term was put onto the center stage of political vocabulary and became also a pejorative term.
Yeah.
The two of them were messaging and what we can loosely say is the personality issue. Those have been there for quite some time, and I don't think there's anything unique about it. The forms of messaging, the instruments of messaging may have differed. But let's get to the first one. And I think this is at the heart of the issue. What I see around the world is a questioning of certain assumptions about what an elite, which people regard as an unelected elite, a cozy elite, and by implication a rotten elite, their monopoly over decision-making is being questioned. Look at the anti-EU moves which have been going on all over Europe with different degrees of intensity. And you will find that it's all about how dare an unelected elite sitting in Brussels presume to tell everyone what to do. Trump, you see, similarly, a rotten Republican establishment, a rotten Democratic establishment, and the swamp in Washington. That's the ire which is directed.
And hence drain the swamp.
Yeah. And in India, it hasn't come about in such a form. But what has happened is it's anti-dynastic politics. It's also anti the apertures of dynastic politics, which has been summarized perhaps rather crudely in the word Lutyens. Lutyens elite.
Though the BJP does have its share of dynasty, just not the
it
top
might have.
job.
I'm talking about what the thrust is.
Yeah.
What the thrust is. So, if you look at it, there are differences, but there is the commonality of everyone wanting to reclaim or get their hands on power and dispossess the thing. And incidentally, it's not really BJP alone. I mean, even the Aam Aadmi phenomena was also was also an outcome of this sort of thing, that there is a corrupt body of politics.
So let me take that to Yogendra, because you were previously associated with the Aam Aadmi party till you and Prashant Bhushan broke away to form your own party. But I think that's an interesting cue, because there too it was, would you say that was a popular uprising, the anti-corruption movement that then took the form of a political party, or was it a populist? Because some would say today, with the benefit of hindsight, that this sort of one-size-fits-all antidote to corruption in the form of a Lokpal actually was a very populist and popular idea. Is there a difference between popular and populist?
There were elements of both. I don't know if it's working.
Yeah.
There were elements of both. I think we need to be clear about what we mean in this discussion for the next hour or so. the word populism can be used in two very, very different senses of the term. You could say populism, popular as opposed to institutional claptrap of democracy. Peron, in some ways Trump, these are people who say, I represent the people, don't care two hoots about all these institutions and so on. That's one form of populism. Another form of populism, which is talked about most often in the economic press, may be more relevant to occasions like this, are policies of redistributional kind, which say we don't care about its consequences for inflation, for deficit or whatever. This must be done for the people. These are two different senses. These days, we've started using it in a third and a very, very loose sense of the term, and I don't know how helpful it is to talk about that, which is any assertion of the people against some form of elite. The reason I don't find it very helpful is because that's the essence of democracy. That's what democracy is meant to deliver. So what is wrong about it? Because the word populism carries a negative connotation, a pejorative connotation.
But is there a pushback against an old arrangement of power? You know, when you say what else is democracy but the people against a certain kind of hegemony, but what we're seeing today is a questioning of establishment politics.
I can see the point. I see the point that Swapan made. We can make connections. The only reason I hesitate is that there's a tendency among us, the Indian elite, to vicariously participate in someone else's history. I don't see necessarily a connection between what's happening. I mean, I hear things that are happening in Europe and the US. I don't quite see them being reflected in India. I'm more interested in what's happening here. And the point I think to realize is that both these forms of populism are necessary consequences of structural problems. Democracy fails to deliver to the people. 200 years ago, elite all over the world were fearful of democracy. Today they are comfortable because democracy has worked out arrangements in which people's voice is heard only episodically.
And during elections.
Not even during elections. Only in episodic moment of popular rebellion. So the voice of the people, which was supposed to be heard routinely in democracy, has become an occasional episode. And on the economic side, that populism arises from a fundamental contradiction between the logic of capitalism and the logic of democracy. One says equal entitlement to all, the other says nothing equal about it. And therefore, political power is used occasionally to tame excesses of economic inequality. So in that sense, both these forms of populism are necessary consequences of living in mass democracies with very high poverty, huge inequalities, under formal arrangements of democracy of equality.
Okay. Kamal, Nath, I remember when the Congress was decimated in the 2014 elections, you were very vocal at the time, and you said that the Congress had failed to read the pulse of a changing India, of a new India, of an I think the phrase you used was an aspirational India. Now, with all your experience, and you're somebody who continues to win elections, you are that rare breed who hasn't actually experienced the anger of the voter. With all your experience, do you find that politics has actually shifted to a more populist mode? Or are you with Yogendra that we are extrapolating, that we are applying things that don't actually apply to our own domestic democracy?
We must recognize that politics has not only changed the world over, it's changed in India. If you look at politics of the last decade and the decade before that and the decade before that, which I have experience of, it was the conventional thing, rich versus poor. Now it's not so rich versus not so poor. But more important than that, it's haves versus have-nots. The two-wheeler versus the four-wheeler. That a two-wheeler, he has a two-wheeler, why don't you have a four-wheeler? You had aspirational, we talk of a young aspirational society. I don't think in India today it's any more a young aspirational society. You have a middle-aged aspirational society. a very large middle-aged aspirational society, perhaps the largest on this planet. And aspirations are now being pronounced. Now in countries like China, which are not democracies, they don't come out in the open. But in India, they're coming out of the open. You had the left and the right and the center. What's been rejected is the center. Okay, now you have populists of the left and populists of the right. Trump is the classic example. What did he do? He took on his own party. I don't think there's a single politician in history. He took on his own party. He took on the media. He took on women. He took on blacks. He took on Hispanics. He took on the business community and arrived after having taken them on. And he continues to do that.
But it's so interesting that you would say that there's a rejection of the center, because I think actually it's not just in politics but even in the media that there is now a pressure to choose a polarity. And if you actually don't fit the polarity, and I would see someone like myself, I don't identify with the left or the right in an ideological way. What does that do to the Congress party, which has historically been that coalition of all ideologies but mostly chose a centrist positioning? Even if it leans slightly left of center, its positioning essentially was the center. If the center has been taken away, where does a party like yours go? Does it lean more left or does it lean more right?
I think all that is history in politics, left and right. You have Bernie Sanders, who emerged very...
But he was a populist on the left.
No, I know, he was a populist on the left. You have, on the other hand, Trump, who emerged.
So what is Kamal now? Is he a populist of the left or the right, or is he not a populist?
I'm neither. I'd say I'm not a leftist, I'm not a rightist, I'm a pragmatist. I see what it is. And every situation cannot have an infusion of left or right. If you take agriculture and you take up a cause of a farmer, are you left or right? You take up a trader, are you left or right?
But isn't that what you're saying? That today you are compelled or under pressure to take a more black and white position that actually pragmatism allows for?
Different sections, different sectors require different solutions. And you cannot say I'm a leftist. So I'm left-leaning, or I'm a leftist, or I'm a rightist. And what Yogendra just said, that the old formulations do not hold good. And that is the change political scenario today. And this must be recognized, that politics has changed, whether it's in France, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the UK. This changed politics dictates that you have to be a pragmatist. Was the Brexit vote a leftist vote or a rightist vote? Nobody can answer that. It was neither. It was an idealist vote. People are turned inward looking. We must remember that the conventional person believes he is not represented anymore. He believes that he is not represented anymore by the conventional and the mainstream politics and politicians. And that's why you have these movements. And these are all, as Yogendra said, episodic.
Yeah.
They are sparked by episodic. You have farmer suicides in India. Okay, it's episodic. But once that starts firing, then the next thing is another episode. One is, it's not necessarily a one-time episode. Today, they may say, what about electricity? What about water? The Jhogi, the Aam Aadmi Party in India, took on, which was who were entirely with the Congress Party, said that you have a Jhogi, you don't have entitlement. The Congress said, okay, you're an illegal squatter, we'll let you squat there. It was neither left nor right.
Yeah.
We'll let you sit there. Then another party comes to them and says, well, why don't you have electricity? Why don't you have water? Another party comes, why don't you have free electricity? And he says, well, that's it. And so on and so forth. I've given you the example of a Jhogi. But this applies to all.
So you're saying, and then I'll bring in Ashutosh, you're saying that there's no ideological sort of purity left. It's what is happening is the angst of the ordinary voter.
In France, Barkha, in France, the president, was he left, right? He was a newcomer. 6 months before, nobody gave him any percentage points. He wasn't even in double figures.
So are we agreed on one thing, Ashutosh, Varshney, that old politics is being challenged? The only skeptic in this panel on drawing a broad generalization is Yogendra.
Let me say two things. And they indirectly answer your question, not directly. First, the distinction between popular and populist is extremely important. Nehru was popular, Obama was popular, but they were not populists.
Who is a populist? Trump.
Trump, Marine Le Pen, Juan Perot, Indira Gandhi, Narendra Modi.
Are populists.
They are populists, and there were different kinds of populism. Yeah, one big distinction between popular and populist is that the populist politician does not like institutional constraints on power between elections, and the only source of legitimacy he or she seeks, is the election. Right. Between elections, whether there should be judicial oversight, whether there should be oversight by the press, oversight by an independent intelligence agency, which does not exist in India, right? These oversight institutions between elections a populist rejects and tries to undermine. And so now, but there is also distinction between right-wing populism and left-wing populism.
What is the distinction?
Left-wing populism, as Yogendra rightly put it, is redistributive in nature. So you transfer of resources to the poor from the rich.
But can be as undermining of institutions.
It can be. No. So both forms of populism have that character, right?
Yes,
Both forms of populism.
yes.
But the right-wing populism also believes that the nation belongs to a majority community. It has been consistent. So Mr. Trump, who is hard to categorize, but on this he can be categorized. The nation belongs to the white community primarily. The Hispanics, the blacks, are subsidiary national agents or national citizens. The Hindu community owns the nation in India according to the Hindu nationalists. The Muslims, the Christians are subsidiary to the nation. They're national subsidiarity, if not opposition.
So would you classify
Would you
classify Indira Gandhi?
She's a left-wing populist. She was a left-wing populist.
So the emergency was what?
Left-wing populism.
The emergency was left-wing?
Serious left-wing populism. The argument was that I represent the people and I do not like institutional constraints of any kind. I do not. I just want to, I represent the people, I represent their authenticity, I represent their will. Mr. Modi is saying the same thing. I represent their will. I represent the authentic will of people. This is, all populists have said this. Both left and right variety. All populists have said this. And all populists do not like institutional constraints between elections.
So let me throw open your definition, since you're the only person who sought to define it. Swapan, is that a construct you would agree with, that we've had popular leaders, but we've had populist prime ministers, and the two named by Professor Varshney are Indira Gandhi and the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Is that an acceptable categorization?
Well, it doesn't matter if you use the word populist or popular, whatever is the thing. The important thing is that in the case of Indira Gandhi, she identified various impediments. The courts were a big impediment for her. At one time, she talked about the syndicate, which was money power, which she saw as a big impediment to her. And she saw certain opposition parties also as great impediments to her. Now, Modi, as far as has been less categorical about it. There have been adverse court judgments, but there's not really been a conflict with the courts. I mean, you can have the odd skirmish here and there, but that's not serious conflict. There's been a larger issue about the media. The media has been because it is felt that the media represented a certain ideological force. Now that formulation may be right or it may be wrong, but it's a perception, and it's a perception which is also shared by a lot of people. And therefore you create parallel structures of communication. Now, in the case of Modi, using Ashutosh's categorization, you will find that there are elements of what he calls right and what he calls left in that. There is obviously a certain deification of the nation. You could even detect elements of majoritarian issues there. But there are equally very, very strong elements of what might be called redistributive thing. The entire Jandan, the ostensible purpose of demonetization, etc., which often resembles a class war. It's very much there. And so the neat categorization of left and right, here Kamal is absolutely right, that sometimes these don't necessarily work in India. The important thing really is to identify. I'm not terribly sure as to why we are talking in terms of this populism as being a very defining feature of Indian politics.
Do you not think something has shifted?
there are various things which have been shifting, but there are different forms of shifts which have taken place all over the world.
What would you call them conceptually?
No,
what,
I don't
what is
nec-
the category you would use?
No, that is something which I leave to academics to
In
Kamal,
the, in
Kamal,
the
Kamal.
end of the day,
Yeah.
popular, populist are words and subjects for debates here. In the people, and I can speak with some knowledge, they are concerned with what is delivered. Now, whether you call it popular, populist, you call it left, right, it's all very well. Question is, what has he got? And you can be promising anything. You can promise anything and everything which has happened. The question the people will ask at the end of the day is, listen, how did it affect me? What did I get out of it?
No, but there are decisions, let me just interject there. There are decisions that actually cause hardship, but they are forgiven because there's a larger messaging, and demonetization to me would be a prime example of something that disrupted life for even the very poor, because it was positioned, perhaps played to a kind of class war, played to a kind of class envy, but it could have been a deeply unpopular decision. Kamal.
No. In the beginning, the narrative with demonetization was given that this is to fight the corrupt, this is to fight the rich, this is to fight those who haven't paid taxes. It became a class war. Now people have started realizing, listen, nothing happened. And we were made to undergo, and they still undergo. The effects of demonetization have been felt in the last 2 months, and for the first 3-4 months, it didn't affect the people. Now, in rural India, from where I come, it's shaken up trade, it's shaken up agriculture. That chap says, I don't have any cash. The banks, a rural bank in a village says, I've got money in your account, but I don't have any currency. And he says, okay, new method of corruption. You give me 10%, I'll find the currency. So people said this was a hoax. This was a hoax to benefit others.
What if it still doesn't cost elections? What I'm pushing you on is your argument that it's only what you deliver that counts. And I am making the argument that sometimes even if you don't deliver anything concrete, your messaging can be more effective than your challenger's messaging, and therefore it's not being measured on what you deliver.
In 79, when I contested my first election, half my speech, my narrative was America's bad, CIA, usual thing. Politics between then and now has become so localized. This is another thing we must understand, that politics has become localized. If we talk things in a village which do not affect the village or the nearby villages, they say, this is irrelevant. You tell me what's happening here. What happened to my water? What happened to my electricity? What happened to my road? Okay, and these are the things which will determine the next election. In 2009, when the Congress party won, why did we win? And in 2004, when the Congress party won against a stalwart, against a loved Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, okay, how did it happen? It happened because we said they are talking about all this, what have you got? In 2009, when we went to the elections, we said we waived your loans, did we not? We raised agricultural prices. We must remember 65% of the people in this country, whatever economist may tell you, he may disagree with me, he's far more knowledgeable than me, but at least here I hope you won't, that 65% of the people in the country are agriculturally dependent. They are not farmers. Farmers may be 43%, but the tractor driver, the agricultural laborer is agriculturally dependent. And they are the ones which drive, we miss this point at forums like this, whether it's in Davos or whether it's in Delhi. They are the ones which drive the economy, the disposable incomes, not income per capita, but the disposable income. A 5 lakh rupee income per year in Delhi means nothing. But a 5 lakh rupee income per year in my district means one SUV. He'll go and buy a car because it's a disposable income. So we have to understand different ground realities which are driving our economy and driving our politics. This is one of the most important things which are getting missed. And we are getting stuck in left, right, popular, populist. All this is all very well.
So that would suggest, Yogendra, that there is a kind of demise of ideology. Whereas I would argue, and I would still push Mr. Kamal Nath on this point, that in some cases, ideological positioning, even if it's not pure, it can be malleable, it can be adjusted, it can be adapted, can trump development issues. I am not that convinced that people only vote on Bijli Sadak Pani.
I would again urge that, like we vicariously participate in the history of many other countries, we also vicariously participate in their ideological battles. The point is that the left and right actually did not make sense at any point in Indian history for the very simple reason that the political right has always deployed the vocabulary of economic left. Remember, the BJP started as a Gandhian socialist party. They may have forgotten it, but it's still on their documents. And what Mr. Modi is doing currently is actually pushing the economic agenda of the right with a very clever, and that's a communication marvel, brilliant communication, which very carefully picks up elements from economic left's rhetoric to push the agenda of the economic and political right. What we are witnessing is brute naked majoritarianism of the form this country has never witnessed before. My friend Swapan is somewhat mild, understandably so, about those things. What we are witnessing.
But are you linking what you see as majoritarianism to the economic
we are
rhetoric
looking at a combination which we should not rush to categorize under any description of European history. Let's try and understand what's happening to us. I'll bother about labels much later. Whether fascism is the right word, I don't think it's the right word. Populism is the right word, I don't think it's the right word. We Indians happen to be living our own history, and let's get used to that fact, like Americans did, like everyone else did. What we are witnessing today is a brute, naked majoritarianism of the worst kind.
I want you to define what you mean by majoritarianism.
In this instance, it is straightforward, as you said. We Hindus are a majority. We are landlords. Everyone is a tenant. You must live at our will and sweet will. As long as you behave right, it's okay. Otherwise, we'll put you to some serious test. So for the first time in the history of this country, minority communities have been reduced to a de facto second-rate citizenship. I don't want to drag today's debate entirely to those things. I know Swapan would disagree, and let's not degenerate this entire debate into those things. I do think the parallel between Indira Gandhi and Modi are much, much stronger than Swapan may be willing to acknowledge right now.
But would you have said we were majoritarian under but you would not have said we were majoritarian under an Indira Gandhi.
You would not say
majoritarian in this sense.
Not in this sense.
Not. Of course not. I mean, we need to understand every every pathology in its specificity. The trouble with us is, and that's the trouble with our left intellectuals as well, we continue to believe that our disease must have come from Europe, so it must be fascism. It's not fascism. What we are witnessing today is majoritarianism. We are witnessing institutional destruction of the kind which very strongly resembles what Indira Gandhi
That's
did.
what I was just going to say.
That's a resemblance.
I
know now I'm putting
now
you're trouble.
You managed
them to some difficulty. What do I say? Truth has to be spoken.
Majority.
I'll come to you in a second.
Majority and majoritarian are two different things. Rajiv Gandhi had 414 seats in parliament. What do you call that? Was he?
No, you had a majority, he was not majoritarian. That's correct.
He was not majoritarian.
Yes.
So a majority doesn't
he didn't say that. Yeah.
But just like Yogendra makes this very interesting point that the BJP is using the rhetoric of the left and the economic agenda of the right, in his view, Indira Gandhi, to actually explore this parallel a little more, would not have in fact been classified today as a left-wing populist. If you look at her whole creation of Bangladesh, her whole position on nationalism, for example, that does not borrow from the left at all. And that is perhaps where today's Congress is facing a disconnect with the present mood.
Can I just remind you of one small historic fact?
Which is?
That throughout that period from 1969 till 1977, Indira Gandhi was supported by the Communist Party of India. They were the allies of Indira Gandhi at that point.
Yes. Interesting.
So, no, I think Yogendra is right to say that there hasn't been pure right-wing politics in India, perhaps Swatantra Party. Right?
Yeah,
Swatantra Party
that was the only exception.
To be right.
What is pure right wing?
Yeah, what is it?
The right wing.
What is the purity?
There is economic right wing and there is cultural right. There is economic right and cultural. Hold on. The cultural right politics is this way, the idea that a particular community, the majority community of the nation, owns the nation. And minorities are
Adjunct.
Are adjuncts.
Yes.
That's the cultural right, right? Economic right, a la Swatantra Party, would be that markets will solve all the problem, and state intervention is not necessary. Now, it is true that other than that party, all right parties in India have had to respond to the widespread poverty of the masses. Therefore, the market-based solution that Swatantra Party proposed is not really a solution that you would easily embrace as a politician or as a party. So Mr. Modi has doubtless combined right-wing, what I would be calling right-wing populism, with some economic.
But does India not push everybody
towards
to the
left.
center?
Does
Does governance not push everybody to the center?
Swapan is right. Jan Dhan Yojana, the rhetoric of demonetization was what? Even though it hurt the poor, it's clear to me, it was seen as an attack on the rich rather than something that hurt the poor.
That's
That
a clever
was
deployment.
justification.
That's precisely the point. It's a
Jan Dhan
very
Yojana-
clever deployment
Jan
of
Dhan Yojana-
rhetoric from the
toilets-
other end.
Toilets for all. Now, middle class doesn't need toilets. Middle class has toilets.
So
It's
one
for the
minute,
poor.
one minute,
It's
one
for the
minute,
poor.
one minute. What is the genuinely left other than the communists? And they too have had to readapt. Jyoti Basu may have had a different view. Buddhadev Bhattacharya may have had a different view.
You can have
of-
various shades
you
of
said there's
leftism,
no-
but you would not believe.
What is the
a
Congress? What is the Congress party? How
A
would you
leftist
classify it?
economist would not believe that markets would solve
I
all
got
the
that
problems.
point. How would you classify the Congress?
Congress
You and Yogendra
Congress party
classify
is
the
left of
BJP.
center, clearly left of center. In
So
economics.
Indira Gandhi was left of center in economics.
Indira Gandhi was more than left of center.
No,
Was left of left
in
center.
economics.
Yes,
but
she was.
in what other ways?
On
was she
national
left?
security, you're right. Not national
That's
security.
right.
It's not clear to me that national security has always caught left-wingers in a trap.
But not Indira.
With Indira
Not
Gandhi,
Indira.
No, Indira Gandhi she came out of the trap easily and attacked Pakistan and bifurcated Pakistan.
Okay, Kamal
So
and
you
Swapan.
can
I need to get
what I
Kamal and Swapan
understand
in.
is that you can be culturally right and economically left. Okay, this cocktail.
Yes.
This is the cocktail that Mr. Modi is
Yeah,
practicing.
yeah, okay. So that I'm saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying culturally right and this left. I moved away from this. I said, forget this left and right. Okay? We are immersed too much in this ideological perception of your left, your right, your left of center, your right of center. All this has been washed away. It's washed away in the United States, it's washed away in Europe, and it's being washed away.
Washed away for now.
Yeah, I'm saying
we
now.
have to see what happens in 4 or 5 years.
I agree with you. I'm talking about today. You're seeing this in the Philippines. You're seeing this in many countries. There's no question of left or right. The question is what they are delivering. And you're right. Yeah, I think each one who's saying anything is right in their own way. That we are now in a crucible. India is now in a melting pot. And in this melting pot, we've got to understand that there is no solution which is left or right. You can't say, I'm a leftist, so that's why this will be my solution. You've got to see what flies. What flies, whether it's left or right, works. When we liberalized in 1991, in the cabinet meeting at that time, it was the only cabinet meeting I've attended which it had to be adjourned for 15 minutes. Because there were those in the cabinet who opposed Dr. Manmohan Singh. And they said, what does this Sardar know? Then, he said, what does he know? What does he say? He's saying that.
Yeah.
So Dr. Manmohan Singh, in his own style, said that, okay, if you are right, where will you buy fuel after 30 days from? There was no money to buy fuel. So we have to do this. Now, were we left or right? Okay. We were neither left, neither right. We had to buy fuel.
Yeah.
That was it. So we started the liberalization movement. I remember when I was commerce minister, I used to be asked this by colleagues of Swapan and of the media, that you are taking this stand against the WTO. You're going to make the WTO collapse because it's so leftist. We never thought you were a leftist.
Yeah.
Now we are seeing today what happened at that time, this whole atmosphere against globalization, this whole atmosphere which is taking is what I said was everything is becoming more localized. And it is this localization, the localization of politics, whether it's at a constituency level, whether it's at a national level, or it's a state level. If you go to a state to campaign in a state election, and I talk about Kerala's fishing industry, that we did this for Kerala's fishing industry, they'll ask me to go and take a walk because they're not concerned. So politics is localized at all levels, at a national level also. That's what Trump recognized.
But Swapan,
Can I just
just wanted
agree
to
with Kamal that yes, localization, and I think we are talking about localization. But where people like Ashutosh and others would say, we can be localized in everything, but when it comes to culture, we have to be cosmopolitan. So there is this grand overview of an international cosmopolitan fraternity, which is, and there should be a discounting of authenticity when it comes to that sphere. And this is
What do you mean by authenticity?
When I talk about indigenous things, when you talk, you see, in India, the elite has always aspired for a global identity. Now, that's nothing per se wrong in that. But it was also accompanied by a certain huge measure of condescension towards those who were less
Agreed.
cosmopolitan than
Yes.
them. And it was that culture wars which you see today. And there are some manifestations of it which are a little crude.
Yeah.
But the essence of that culture wars lies in that.
But can I
that
push-
of
can I-
people
can I-
trying to reclaim
Stop it.
that, look, we too,
Till-
our identity is as valid as your
Till-
identity. Our food tastes, primitive as it may be as valid as your rather outward looking, that you can believe in fine dining, but I can believe in a UDP restaurant.
But that is fine, and that takes us back to that pushback against a kind of old elite and the rootlessness that the elites are having to
use that.
confront. In finding a language that a majority of people will understand. I take that point, Swapan. But do you find that these culture wars can shift the ideological moorings of a country, and do you measure that by how a country votes? And the reason I ask this is, Trump may start by talking about the ordinary American white guy who's out of a job today, but that results in there's a spin-off that results in a certain immigration policy, that results in a certain othering of other communities. Are we witnessing that here? Are we seeing a country, Yogendra calls it majoritarian, are we seeing our country lurch to the right?
There was a very interesting election which took place in Germany. And I think one of the facets of that German election, which caught a lot of people by surprise, was the 13% or so votes polled by the AfD,
Yes. The far right.
Alternative for Deutschland.
Yes.
Now, the basic issue which determined that AfD was not because they wanted to they wanted to wear jag boots and sort of put up pictures of Hitler, but they asked the question, which is that Angela Merkel allowed 1 million refugees, asylum seekers, call them whatever you want to, from West Asia into Germany. They said, did you ask anyone? Were we ever consulted? And this, to my mind, is very thing that how dare a particular elite presume on the strength of
But that's true for
loftiness,
all
etc.
decisions taken by all governments.
No.
Why,
The question
why
is some
zero in only on
monumental.
this?
So therefore, there are protests against
It's happening in Myanmar.
Yes, man.
That's happening anywhere else.
Today,
It's happening
you can
in
talk about
Myanmar.
Rohingyas. You can talk about Rohingyas and shed tears for them.
Nobody shed, but this is a
you
country-
ask
but
that
this-
question in the Northeast.
Yeah.
You ask it in the Northeast,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they'll tell you, we don't want them.
Yeah, absolutely. But the lack
This
of
is,
support.
Kamal will agree. This is the reality of the
It
situation.
is the lack of support of free trade, of liberalization, of multiculturalism
Yes.
is manifesting itself. In Germany, it's the personality. The AfD would have got many more votes. It was the personality by Angela Merkel and the stability, because this was an unknown quantity.
Okay, so-
AfD was unknown, yet 13% people voted. I met a German 4 days ago, and I said, who did you vote for? He says, I wanted to vote for the AfD, but I was embarrassed.
Yeah.
That means his thinking is AfD. And he's embarrassed he said that openly to me.
But then here's where I think constitution comes in, right? And that is where we are back actually to the populism debate. That Yogendra, because a lot of people believe one thing, is that what a government is obliged to do?
Yes.
Picking up on both Swapan and Kamal's point, when Swapan says, the Germans said, who asked us? When we talk about the Rohingyas and Swapan says, ask the people. Maybe the people don't want this. Is a government that represents the people obliged to follow what the majority of people believe? And isn't that a slippery slope? Because the majority of Indians may not want to decriminalize homosexuality. The majority of Indians may not want to criminalize marital rape. there is such a thing as a constitutional value. Exactly. That is not about what the polls show necessarily.
Absolutely.
Democratic arrangements are not about majority. They are about constraining majority. That's what makes it a constitutional democracy.
What you cannot do.
You know, winning elections and anyone who wins election can do what he likes for the next 500 years is not democracy. It is at the same time, democratic politics is also legitimizing those actions in the eyes of the people. That's the art we have forgotten. In a post-colonial nation, nationalism is the currency. Nationalism for us is not what nationalism is in Europe. In Europe, the moment you say someone is a nationalist, you are saying bit of a right-winger, possibly a racist, and so on. That's not what Indian nationalism is. It's a very rich heritage of liberal thought which connected us to the world. And the trouble, and that's my partial agreement with Swapan for a change, which is that the Indian secular elite actually gave up on that rich heritage of Indian nationalism. And that is what has given rise to a very naked form of majoritarianism, which was completely discarded and rejected by Indian nationalism. If that has become acceptable today, it is because of a gross failure of India's English-speaking secular elite, which actually failed to connect to the rich heritage of Indian nationalism.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. But Ashutosh, I want to argue this now the other way. We spoke about constitutional democracy, but let's look at one of the comments Hillary Clinton made in her campaign when she called those who support Trump a basket of deplorables, right? Now, any politician has to find a middle space between upholding a first principle but not judging the people who put you in power. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, so I think basket of deplorables was a terrible way to understand what the masses in America, a terrible way to characterize what the masses wanted in America. And it's roughly the equivalent of what Yogendra just said and Swapan earlier, that the cosmopolitan secular elite, well, some of it was not very cosmopolitan, but let's say secular English-speaking elite of India has thoroughly misbehaved in politics and has opened the space for this naked majoritarianism that we call Hindu nationalism, which is not Indian nationalism as it was defined. Hindu nationalists got virtually no space in Indian nationalism as the movement is developing. Gandhi was a Hindu and a nationalist, but not a Hindu nationalist, right? He was a Hindu and a nationalist, but not a Hindu nationalist. So yes, characterizing masses in such condescending terms is one of the traits of this globalizing secular English-speaking elite, and it has cost them dearly. And to get back to tap again into the rich heritage of Indian nationalism, as Yogen puts it, would be quite necessary to deal with this. But you're absolutely right, and Yogen is also right, that democracy is not only about representing popular wishes. Popular wishes can be full of prejudice against certain communities, right? So democracy is partly about, in large part, about what happens in elections, but democracy is also about what happens between elections and that's where constitutional constraints matter. Constitutions exist to check majoritarian excesses. Yeah. That's why constitutions exist.
We're in the last 5 to 7 minutes. If
Just
people have questions,
one point.
Swapan, and if anyone has questions, please raise your hand.
Who created the Constitution?
Constitution.
I mean, did it come out of thin air? Was it a divine revelation? Was it a divine revelation? You talk about prejudice, which means you are enlightened, someone else has prejudice. I mean, you're a scholar, so you should know what Burke had to say about prejudice, that it's not necessarily always a pejorative term, it also contains a lot of inherited wisdom, which needs to be modified accordingly, etc. But the question about the Constitution as something abstract and something there, unrelated to what is happening on the ground, is, to my mind, a very problematic area. There are certain values we can talk about.
When Trump says Mexicans are rapists and criminals,
I don't know about Trump.
That may represent a certain kind of mass sentiment. It's prejudice.
How does it?
I mean, when the National Green Tribunal,
which dress it up in Burkean terms.
Look, when a national green tribunal, which should be renamed the National Delhi Tribunal, the Green Tribunal for Delhi, says you can't protest in Jantar Mantar because it causes, there are a lot of people who shit on the corner. Basically, that's what they said.
Yeah.
Now, is that an upholding of constitutional values?
The point which we have not made, Swapan, we talked about a lot of things, a lot of cliches, everything, is people have started looking at the quality of democracy in different countries. Even in India, a parliamentary committee is today sitting on that this first past the post system.
Yeah.
Is it the right thing for it? Is it representative? India is the most complex democracy in the world. The most complex democracy and the most complex country to govern. So, the quality of democracy is one which is being now debated. Whether it's in Germany, whether it's in France, you found Le Pen, questioning the quality of democracy. So, this is a subject not for today, but when we talk of populist and popular, we are also talking of the quality of democracy now being questioned. Everyone is questioning, can you bring in a GST?
Yeah.
And impact.
Okay, let's look at GST. It's a great example because actually it was an idea that started, Kamal, with your party. It has now been fructified by this government, but it has a council of all finance ministers of all states. Yet it has become a sort of point of political debate. It's not populist or popular. Nobody understands what it means. Everybody's taxes have gone to hell.
The point is in GST, as you say, we brought it in. Our GST was a different kind. It was one nation, one tax. Now it is GST, IGST,
the GST
CST.
Council is on board with this
There are three
structure.
GSTs. If you look at it, it's how you execute it, how you implement it. GST per se is a fancy word and says, okay, one tax, one nation, one everything. But how do you execute it? Today, I'm told there's a meeting, I've read in the newspapers, they're going to iron out some of things. This is our first experiment. I give that.
Yeah.
I'll give that to Swapan. This is our first experiment with GST. There will be kinks, there'll be issues on it. The question in the end of the day is, 6 months down the road, where will we be? 6 months down the road. Let's not talk of 6 weeks. There is so much of distress today. It's known, it's in the newspapers. Question is, how will it be ironed out? And the right time to make a judgment of this, whether GST, how has it been executed? Per se, as I said, GST is nothing wrong with it. It was our idea. But the execution of it, as in anything, you can have the Jan Dhan Yojana, you can have the direct transfer to bank accounts, but does anybody sitting here know that when you transfer to the bank account, I encounter this on a daily basis. He goes to the bank and he's told, no money. I've got no money, come back after a week. He's gone 15, 20 kilometers trying to get the money, and then he's told, will you give me some money? So, that's it. The question is, how do you execute things in such a complex country? This is the main thing. It's not executing in Delhi. This Delhi-centric and Mumbai-centric and Bangalore-centric is what I think sometimes hurts us, because our perception, our kaleidoscope becomes Delhi,
Okay.
Mumbai and Bangalore.
Okay, I'm literally on the last 5 minutes. If anyone has, I'll take 2 questions from the floor. Okay, I'm seeing some hands. Yes, first row here. Yes.
So my question is to Kamal, Nath. You were talking about that people are looking at the quality of democracy right now.
Hello. So you're talking about that people are looking at the quality of democracy right now. When I look in my friend circle, so I'm a global shaper under 30 community of World Economic Forum, and whenever we share views which are not popular views, I get called like, go to Pakistan. I mean, this happens on daily basis, on Twitter, on Facebook. If I question demonetization, this happens. And I believe this sense of nationalism has overtaken the sense of leftist or rightist or centrist approach, where if you agree with the majoritarian view, in India it's by maybe religion, in US it's by white nationalism, in UK it's by some other sense. I still feel that the populism is right now ruling the world. Even if you look at the news channels, the shrilling voices, overtake the sensible voices. I don't need to comment who I'm talking about, but you know what I'm talking about.
Okay,
That's the Delhi channels. That's the Delhi channels, to answer your question, which are irrelevant in this country. The channels which you aim towards.
But there is a nationalism as political credo.
Yeah.
Yeah, how can we...
It's all over.
Yeah.
No, there is a nationalism as political, as a political slogan that you cannot escape. The Congress, one of the challenges for the Congress is how to define itself against this political construct. I mean, I would say nationalism is the new Hindutva for the BJP.
It will be.
But a certain
because that's
kind
the
of
only thing-
nationalism.
Yeah, but the Congress is in a dilemma. How does it position itself? I mean, I think he has a point there. There is an overriding mood of nationalism
Yeah, it is.
as a political construct. We're
it
all
is-
nationalists,
Yeah.
but I mean as a political construct.
And if you oppose demonetization, you're anti-national. Which is
Yeah, let Kamal respond.
I must say that nationalism is not new. What happened in 89 and 91, two of the toughest elections I've had, on this temple, Ayodhya, this big yatras being taken. What happened? It was, you couldn't stand up and say, I'm not a Hindu. You couldn't stand up and say that I don't want the temple in Ayodhya. So you had to address it, you had to face it. So it was nationalism, whipped up. That nationalism of 89 to 91 was nationalism which has never been whipped up till today.
No,
What will
we're
happen
not
tomorrow, I
talking
don't
about
know.
that
Yeah.
kind of religious,
I just wanted to
religion-based
make one
nationalism.
point.
Yeah.
The moment we begin to call what happened in 89 and 91 nationalism, we've lost the battle. That's the problem. The problem is what happens in TV channels today and all this rhetoric. The moment we begin to concede that this is nationalism, we've lost the battle. The only antidote to this form of quote-unquote nationalism is nationalism, is India's nationalism. Please remember, India's nationalism was never Hindu majoritarian. All these absolutely obnoxious ideas were repeatedly discussed and routinely rejected by Indian nationalism. So the only solution to we are not living in Europe. We cannot say these nationalists. We live in a post-colonial democracy where the only sort of antidote to nationalism is nationalism.
I think that's...
It always reminds me of this hoary debate about the idea of India, which I've always had grave misgivings about because it presumes there is one idea of India. Therefore, like Yogendra says, there is nationalism. His nationalism is the pure one. My nationalism is a debased currency. I think there's a larger issue. And I think what the point you're making is, it's got to do with basic civility.
Yeah.
You know, what has happened in India is that there's suddenly been a democratization of the discussion space because of technology. And a lot of people are just not very accustomed to it. The language of discussion. So the first thing they say, they don't like your argument, they say, go to Pakistan. I mean, there might be a much better reason, but they are not being able to articulate it. And it's got a lot to do with various things, including our education system, including the absence of a vocabulary for a lot of people.
Okay, no, I have to move on.
I think it's not got to do with anybody being less of a human being.
Okay, literally we have 2 minutes. I'm going to take 2 questions together and then closing comments from the floor. The girl at the back and then here in the front row. Yeah, just stand up and ask your question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Sohara from Bangladesh. I'm a global shaper. My question is actually to all of you, and it's about an issue, sir, you touched upon, the Rohingya issue, and as you know, we're on the forefront of it. I've actually personally worked with them. My question is simple. It's from a perspective of a country like India, where the popular sentiment may be against the humanitarian cause, how would you respond?
Okay, can we just park that and take your question together and someone can answer? Just ask your question.
My name is Utkarsh, and I assure you I'm not the only person in the room who thinks that politics globally is in a bad shape. Michael Porter recently put forward a paper that globally populism results from political parties across the world functioning as duopolies. Do you think that that's the case in India as well? Basically, people saying the same thing in different languages.
Okay, so 2 questions there. One on the Rohingyas, one on duopolies.
Could you explain the term duopoly? Just to, just
oil, like 2 companies basically dictating the narrative or prices or.
Okay, can we? These are closing comments, 30 seconds each. Swapan, why don't we start with the question from Bangladesh, our friend from Bangladesh?
I think that the issue of Rohingyas, in terms of perception, there's no different in Bangladesh as in India. Bangladesh is facing the frontal thrust because of its contiguous border about the Rohingya refugees. But even in Bangladesh, it's well recognized that the basic problem of Rohingya is twofold. One, there is a problem of representation and constitutional accommodation of Rohingyas within the Myanmarese political setup. But equally, that there is in the Rohingya movement a very, very radical, somewhat virulent strain, which Bangladesh is afraid of, which India is afraid of. Now, we would rather not invite this problem into our doorstep. And I think that's this decision based on national self-interest, it's based on selfishness, but it's based on that. It's not necessarily that people are opposed to some sort of rehabilitation for them, and other means will be used. But I don't think necessarily that India, we will not do what Angela Merkel did. Germany wasn't involved in that battle in West Asia. They invited 1 million people. I'm sorry, in India, I don't think we have that elbow room any longer to be able to do that. We have done it in the past. And
I was just going to say that we have been welcoming of Tamil
yeah,
refugees.
we have been welcome.
Tibetan
We have done it in the
refugees,
past.
Hindus from Pakistan.
We have done it in the past, and I think by and large, our attitude is one of accommodation. But there are times when you've got to say, no, let's just.
Okay, the Rohingyas could trigger another 1 hour.
That's
We
it.
don't have
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
We have closing comment time. Ashutosh, do you want to take this gentleman's question? Then Kamal and Yogendra can wrap it up. Ashu.
I think this, the idea of sort of duopoly generating populism would essentially revolve around the idea, another idea, namely that both companies or both parties in this contest are not functioning properly. If that's what it means, yes. That's the established political parties have not, according to the masses at this point, rightly or wrongly, have not behaved properly, have not functioned properly. And so the wishes of the masses are expressing themselves in very populist forms. And some politicians are tapping into it. If that's what you mean, I think that's fair, right? And some of what we said goes in that direction. On Rohingya, I would disagree with Swapan. I would say that you need to distinguish between Rohingya terrorists and ordinary Rohingyas who need humanitarian help. And this distinction, and if they are not welcome in the Northeast is not the only part of India where you can house them. And there is a deeply humanitarian sentiment that people have deployed in the past in India when it comes to these questions. I think the fact is that the Rohingya are Muslim, and that is creating all kinds of issues in politics. And that needs to be
Okay.
Just as a small anecdote, how do you explain that the Rohingya refugees who came earlier didn't necessarily settle in the Northeast, but actually settled in Jammu and Ladakh?
No,
It's a rather curious one.
it is curious.
It is rather curious.
It is curious, indeed.
Yes, and I think that should tell you a
I
story.
think this question about two parties, there aren't two parties in this country. You must remember the BJP got this majority in parliament with 31% of the votes. Where did the balance go?
No, that's
Even-
as true for the Congress, which won on 28%
I'm
of the
saying,
vote.
so, that's why I'm saying you can't just say two parties. If you be state,
No, I'm at the end, the closing comments. Yeah.
if you got to be state specific, you have so many, you have this, what I call the diversification of politics and the fragmentation of politics which has taken place over the last decade. So we can't just pin it on two parties. But the time has not yet come what you're thinking that will it be just one spatting the other and, the other spatting the other.
Yeah.
On Rohingyas, I think that India needs to act by taking a very, very active diplomatic stand. A very active diplomatic stand by Myanmar. That you better take, they are yours. Now you better create an atmosphere, an environment that they are welcome back. And India has the means and the standing to take that diplomatic position, a strong diplomatic position on this. The answer is India taking not whether we are going to keep the Rohingyas or not keep the Rohingyas. The answer lies in getting around, persuading Myanmar to take back the Rohingyas. Why have the Rohingyas come? Because the environment was such. Now Myanmar must create an environment which invites them back. And this is, India can play a very major role in this and show to the world that, what India stands for.
Okay, we do have to close. Yogendra Yadav, your
The
last.
only trouble is that if India takes it up with Myanmar and says you must treat your minorities properly, someone might turn around and ask India a few questions, which may be very difficult questions.
But
for
our
its government
minorities
to
are not
answer.
fleeing our
But
country.
I don't want to get
it's
into
not
that.
we do not have people leaving our, no minority
Not
is
yet.
leaving.
I mean, a minority, Muslims are coming into India, and you're suggesting that India is inhospitable for them. I mean, Look at the paradox of your
I'm
comment.
not suggesting. All I'm saying is that someone would ask if the simple fact
No,
is
you,
everyone in the
not
world-
someone you are asking.
Chalo, we have to
moment-
close.
I didn't want it to become. I didn't
Yeah,
want
let's
to
close with
with
a larger
this.
picture.
I did want to just point out the hypocrisy in doing something of this kind at a global level. That hypocrisy would be pointed out.
Okay,
obviously.
let's move
The
on.
more important
Yeah.
question is about. Can I come back
Yes.
to populism
Yes.
towards the end? To my mind, populism, both of the cultural nationalist variety and of the economic variety, which unfortunately we have not discussed very much today, both are necessary consequences of the failure of the system that we live in. Because our democracy fails to deliver routinely to the people, once in a while they want something big, something visible, something coming as a flash. This is why economic populism comes. And because our democratic elite fails to relate meaningfully to the cultural language of the people, therefore, once in a while, these extremely aggressive, pathological expressions come out. The only way to respond to that, populism is a pathology, but the only way to respond to that pathology is by correcting those institutional flaws. The basic contradiction between inequality of capitalist system and equality of democracy on the one hand.
Yeah.
Second, the dominance of constitutional secular values and popular beliefs on the other hand. These need to be meaningfully related, otherwise this pathology will continue.
Okay, we have to leave it there. I think it's been a riveting conversation. Thank you to our panel. Thank you very much.